Hi, my name's Rose of Dawn, and today I'm going to be talking about the recent GenderQuake debate on Channel 4 in which I appeared in the audience. So this video is going to be a little bit different. This one's going to be kind of off script a little bit. So what I'm going to be talking about is the appearance that I made on, or kind of appearance, I just really appeared in the audience, although I was meant to be having a little bit more of a role in the show actually. So yesterday night at 10 PM on Channel 4 there was a show called GenderQuake The Debate. It featured a number of panellists including Monroe Bergdorf, Jermaine Greer and Caitlin Jenner. I was invited on the show as a targeted member of the audience. At the end of the show what was meant to happen was that several people in the audience, including myself, were going to be asked direct questions about our thoughts on the overall gender debate. I had a specific question in line for me. If you want to kind of know the details of what I would have discussed, then you can check out my video, Transsexuals versus Gender Radicals. That would basically be touching on the points that I was asked to raise. So I was found by the show after taking part in this hashtag on Twitter called TS Rain Crew, which is a group of transsexuals who are speaking out against what's effectively just a rebranding of what it means to be trans, where we're being forced under an umbrella which we don't really belong to because we don't have a lot in common. So one of the producers found my video, they got in touch with me over Twitter, we had a bit of an exchange over the phone, and they were quite interested in getting me in because the points that I had raised in my video had never really been discussed before, at least on television, and these were views that they were completely alien to them. So they said that they enjoyed the video, they got in touch with me, and everything was then arranged where I would be asked this question on the show. They got a taxi for me and I arrived at the studio about 8:30 yesterday. So the first thing which really happened, I get there and I meet some of the other people who have been chosen as being targeted audience. This includes the women from Man Friday, which is a kind of like a gender critical campaign against self-ID. I got to say that they were absolutely lovely. They have been labelled as being transphobic, but I had conversation with them and they recognise that gender dysphoria is a legitimate medical condition, and one of their concerns with self-ID is that anyone can label themselves as being trans, and as such that affects our legitimacy. And that was really nice to hear, and they were completely respectful throughout. We didn't necessarily agree on all our points, but we had enough in common. And I was also lucky enough to meet Posey Parker. I've done a video on her in the past, I'll link to that in the description. And she was one of the nicest people I met of the night. Completely respectful in every way. We had a really good chat about different things. We're not going to agree on everything, but there's a definite level of respect. And for me that really came out when Caitlin Jenner walked into the room and Posey like prodded me on the knee and was just like, "Oh my God, Caitlin Jenner's there, like why don't you see if you can talk to him?" I mean her. And I know that, like, looking at her Twitter, that's generally not the kind of thing that she does, but she was respectful about that to me. And even if she doesn't necessarily agree with that inside, she has that level of respect for other people. And so that was really positive moment for me, and I have a lot of time and respect for Parker in return. I also briefly chatted to Jermaine Greer before the show. She was okay. We didn't really have a lot to talk about. She was more interested in speaking to Posey Parker. There was a free bar, so I had a couple of drinks before the show. And then we were led into the studio and was given a specific seat because the idea was we would be given a question towards the end. So the panellists then came into the room, and so we started off with like Jermaine Greer, I think was one of the first ones to walk in. There was Monroe Bergdorf, Caitlin Jenner, there was a trans guy, I can't quite remember his name, there was a non-binary person who was very quiet throughout the night, I got to say, and there was also Sarah Ditton, who for me was kind of like the dark horse of the evening. Like, she actually came out with some really good points, and I felt that someone like Munro Bergdorf actually took her out of context on a number of occasions and did that quite intentionally. So we had the main panel, but around the panel that the chosen, like the targeted audience, which is the term they used, were mostly radical feminists, I would say. From looking around, there was a trans woman, quite older. There was a Irish guy who had really nice makeup. I can't quite remember his name. He was lovely. And I think there was like maybe one or two other trans people, but the majority were actually gender radical or gender critical feminists. So the debate began. It started off quite civil. As I just mentioned, there was a point where Sarah Ditton had raised an issue about self-ID, and Munro had taken her a bit out of context, which was a little bit unfair. Caitlyn Jenner raised quite a nice point about how her children still call her dad, or she, is the way that she put it, which was quite nice to hear, actually. Like, she was being quite realistic about it, which was refreshing to hear on television when it's becoming more and more of a absolutist way of looking at this. As the show goes on, it gets a little bit more heated on stage, and I can't help but feel that some of this was actually a bit orchestrated, in particular with Jermaine Greer. So Kathy Newman, who was moderating the event, raised a point about Jermaine Greer making a number of comments which she said was on Victoria Derbyshire, but actually it was on Newsnight, and Greer didn't know how to respond to this because she didn't know what Newman was talking about either. There were several points on that which she seemed to have been pushed at to give a specific answer on it, and eventually she did give it. She gave that soundbite, and the gender critical feminists, like, you know, they applauded that because I think that's what they wanted to hear as well. But it seemed a little bit unfair to kind of target her on this when Munro Bergdorf, who has made similar controversial statements in the past, had a much easier time of it, and it was much less time was focused on it. The way that the audience was set out was that the main panel, including like Caitlyn Jenner and that, were mostly on one specific side, which was they are trans people, and there was also a journalist with them who was more of a, she would refer to herself as a cis ally. And then you had the two gender critical feminists. So it was very weighted on one side, and the conversations which the trans people were having weren't particularly varied. They were just talking about the same points. There was no diversity on that. And the whole show was advertised on this aspect of it being a wide range of opinions. Now, you might have got that had they been able to speak to the audience and someone like myself, but as it stood, there was very little diversity at all. There was the gender critical side, and there was the arguably gender radical side of the likes of Bergdorf, and nothing in the middle, and that kind of frustrated me because, once again, I feel as though my kind of viewpoints are being ignored here. We're only hearing one side of the trans debate, and it was put across as though that's it, that's the only talk that's actually allowed here, nothing else. So the night took a quite nasty tone towards, like, in the second half. So I think around the halfway point they started to get a bit frustrated because I think they felt that they weren't being heard on the show. Then we end up with people starting to interject. Now, this took this came at different levels. So there was a point where Posey Parker interjected something Munro Bergdorf was saying. Personally, I don't think anyone from the audience should have been interjecting at this point. It's clear that the debate is just between the people who are on the panel. But I can't quite remember what it was that she said, but it didn't come across as anything particularly heinous. Now, this did escalate, though, when there were kind of radical feminists to the left and the right of me who eventually started to heckle. And this is where it really became nasty, and this is the bit which I really need to call out, because I've been critical of trans activists when they act in a similar way. I've got to be consistent here. And I understand there's probably going to be people who are going to be watching this video and disagree, and they'll be saying, well, they feel as though their voices weren't being heard. But they at least had two gender critical feminists on the panel. My voice, there was nothing there representing my voice, and I didn't feel the need to interject with anything. So the heckling got quite nasty when they were shouting things like, you have a penis, you're a man. And it wasn't just that they were saying this. These people were quite vicious about it, and it was very aggressive the way that they were saying it. And eventually this kind of led to Munro Bergdorf asking for one of them to be removed, which got a lot of applause. And I've seen this on Twitter get a bit of a mixed response. Some people saying that this is silencing alternative viewpoints, other people saying the gender critical feminists deserved it because they were being rude. And if I'm being completely honest, I'd probably side with the latter on this. So I understand that it's a heated subject and that people are going to be raising viewpoints which are quite emotionally charged. But heckling people and shouting abuse at people on the panel is not the way forward with this. It's like, Munro actually came across more reasonable, and that's something I never thought I would say, and it's something I don't really want to say either. So I'm a bit annoyed that they're making me make that point. But what makes this worse is, this is what the trans activists wanted. They were protesting this filming since when it was announced. When they were doing the research for it, they came across a lot of opposition to what was going to be discussed. And this was all in the run-up. There were people on the hashtag saying they didn't want the show to go ahead. And then one of the reasons for that is they didn't want there to be abuse. And these gender critical feminists handed them that point on a silver platter. Munro was making the point that people like us get abuse. And then you have people in the audience shouting abuse. They might not see it as abuse because they're saying what they consider to be factual things, like you have a penis, you're a man. I don't know whether Munro Bergdorf has had bottom surgery, but that's beside the point. Shouting you're a man in quite an aggressive way is going to be considered abuse. And she can then point to that and say, this is what these people are doing. This is why we shouldn't be having a debate about it. Because as you've seen on national television, we are being attacked for it. And after the show, I found that the production staff didn't really have a bit of an understanding as to what was happening with this. The filming apparently didn't bring up a lot of what the hecklers were saying. And so from someone who was sitting in between these groups, I can say it was actually quite nasty. And at the end of the show, when it kind of stopped rolling, there were two in particular that started shouting, like chanting in a very football hooligan kind of way, I've got to say, this is what patriarchy looks like. And that's just identity politics bullshit right there. And that was horrible. That was incredibly childish. But after the show, I discussed with members of the production, and they apologised for not being able to give me the platform to talk, and they were very interested in what I had to say. Kathy Newman in particular was very interested. I had a lot of conversations with her, and she was absolutely lovely. I got to meet Caitlyn Jenner. Didn't get to chat to her that much, but it was still nice. It was still nice to meet her, and I told her that I have a lot of respect for her because she is a conservative and also trans. And I mentioned to her about the Lily Madigan petition to have her not speak to Parliament just because she's conservative. I was disappointed that I couldn't talk. I was disappointed that Posey Parker couldn't talk either, because I think she has a really important point to say about this, considering her situation. It's a viewpoint that people need to hear. But I think the format itself didn't really work. It should have been more of an audience participation right from the get-go. You would have had a much more diverse range of thought, and it would have made for a better show. Instead, you had two sides basically not so much being hostile to each other, but everyone, like, most people seem to agree on various different points, and I felt that the panel was okay. The only point which I remember really kind of, like, frowning at a bit was the non-binary person who said that they get attacked every single time they go to a bathroom, and from someone who goes to public bathrooms, I'm a bit sceptical of that, if I'm being completely honest, but maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe they do have it hard, I don't know. So, would I go on something like that again? Absolutely, because I want to be able to get my viewpoints out there. I want to be able to show people that this isn't just a binary issue. This isn't like gender. I think viewpoints like ours need to be heard. I think that things like that, traction on that is happening though, with the recent letter which we had published in The Guardian, which I might be doing a video on fairly shortly. But I would love to know what your thoughts on the show were. Did you think that the debate was quite reasonable? Did you feel as though there were points that were being completely missed out? And would you have liked to have heard me talk? Because I would have liked to have heard me talk. So, thanks for watching. I'm sorry this is a bit more of an improv than what I normally do. I normally work off a script. But a new video should be coming up within the next couple of days. So please be sure to like and subscribe and follow me on Twitter, and I will see you all next time.